Venezuelan authorities have welcomed the arrival of the first shipment of the Russian COVID-19 vaccine candidate, Sputnik V, to start the third phase of clinical trials in the country. The UN General Assembly was holding a high-level plenary meeting to commemorate and promote the International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons. US President Donald Trump has been taken to the Walter Reed Military Hospital after testing positive for COVID-19. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. Venezuelan authorities have welcomed the arrival of the first shipment of the Russian COVID-19 vaccine candidate, Sputnik V, to start the third phase of clinical trials in the country. Venezuelan Vice President Delcy Rodriguez and Russian Charge d'Affaires Alexei Serendin officially received the shipment while noting the historic importance of the moment as Venezuela becomes the first country in the Western Hemisphere to participate in the clinical trials of the first vaccine against COVID-19 to be registered in the world. Meanwhile, Venezuelan Health Minister Carlos Alvarado pointed out that over 3,200 Venezuelans will take part in the clinical trials. The Russian vaccine candidate completed the first clinical trials between June and July this year, having received regulatory approval on August 11th.
Without any doubt, it is a historic moment for our homeland, as we are at this moment receiving from our dear sister nation of Russia the first batch of Sputnik V vaccines. And I say this with deep emotion. Venezuela is the first country in the Western Hemisphere to participate in the phase 3 of the clinical trials of this vaccine. You only have to take a look at the history of the world to know the role that Russia has played in favor of humanity, peace, life and the whole planet.
Meanwhile, the Charge d'Affaires of the Russian Embassy in Venezuela, Alexei Serendin, stressed that the arrival of the Sputnik V vaccine candidate was part of joint efforts by Venezuelan and Russian authorities in the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic.
It is an unparalleled event. It is the first time in the Western Hemisphere that the coronavirus vaccine is being delivered. This is a result of great efforts by the Russian Direct Investment Fund and the Venezuelan Ministry of Health. Specialists from these institutions have held several video conferences and contacts to coordinate specific issues related to this vaccine and reached an understanding so that an agreement could be signed for this delivery.
Chile's indigenous communities are demanding the right representation and participation in the constitutional reform process. In this regard, representatives of indigenous communities that make up the Citizens Network asked Congress not to delay any longer the discussion of seats reserved for indigenous peoples with a view to the constitutional process, which will begin in just 24 days. With the holding of the historic referendum on whether to draft a new constitution and who should be responsible for the process. The victory of the yes vote is almost certain, and in that case, activists stress that indigenous peoples should be included among the delegates who will form the mechanism that will be approved for the drafting of the new fundamental law. A bill to guarantee indigenous participation was approved, although the discussion of its particular articles is pending in the Senate Constitution Committee. And Chile's mining sector, the most important of the national economy, is expected to receive investments worth over $74 billion in the next decade. The Chilean Copper Commission presented the investment plan, which contains 49 projects, 5 more than in the similar report presented in 2019, as well as representing $1.5 billion more. Of the new projects, 89% are related to copper mining, as well as 6 in gold extraction, 2 in iron, 5 in lithium, and 1 in industrial minerals. The mining minister said that despite the COVID-19 pandemic, which has had a strong impact on the economy, jobs and plans, the mining sector has remained an engine of the national economy. The Brazilian National Health Surveillance Agency has started the first examination process of a possible vaccine against COVID-19 as a way to accelerate the registration process. The regulatory agency informed that it received some data from the Anglo-Swedish company AstraZeneca, which is developing the drug in partnership with Oxford University. The agency also notes that it approved the evaluation of the first data package of the vaccine, which refers to non-clinical studies. However, the move does not mean that a conclusion can be reached on the quality or safety of the vaccine, as many elements remain to be examined. According to the agency, the objective of the measure is to provide as soon as possible access to vaccines of proven quality against the virus that has killed more than 144,000 people in the country so far. Also in Brazil, Judge Rosa Weber of the Supreme Federal Court has requested information from the Minister of the Environment, Ricardo Salles, on actions that go against the protection of mangroves. The National Environment Council, an advisory body of the ministry headed by Salles, on Monday revoked resolutions that guaranteed, among other things, restrictions on deforestation and the occupation of environmental reserve areas such as mangroves and sandbanks. The decision was criticised and generated a series of reactions, and the Federal Justice of Rio de Janeiro, Judge Maria Amelia Almeida Cenas, suspended the provision in view of the evident risk of irrecoverable damage to the environment. The head of the World Federation of Trade Unions, Latin America and Caribbean Regional Office has stressed that Cuba and its fight against the U.S. economic, commercial and financial blockade is one of the priorities of the organisation. Union leader Ernesto Freire noted that there is a global movement around this issue and stressed that there is no activity related to Cuba in which this criminal policy is not denounced. He also pointed out that the Henry Reeve International Medical Brigades are a means to challenge and break the blockade, not only in the material sense but also as a means to challenge the mass media coverage and lies regarding the Cuban Revolution. The regional coordinator remarked that this is and will continue to be a permanent issue at the WFTU until the US blockade against Cuba is lifted. Cuba currently holds the vice presidency of the Federation. This Friday, the UN General Assembly held a high-level plenary meeting to commemorate and promote the International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons. Heads of state and government and high-level representatives of over 100 nations participated in the plenary meeting, advocating resumed dialogue and negotiations on nuclear arms control and disarmament, while considering how states can return to a common path to work towards the total elimination of these weapons. The meeting also sought to highlight the need for renewed engagement to build sustainable global peace and security. The event provided an opportunity to raise awareness of the threat posed to humanity by nuclear weapons and a necessity to mobilize international efforts towards achieving the goal of a nuclear weapon-free world. And this Friday, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Venezuela, Jorge Arriaza, reiterated Venezuela's position on the need to completely eliminate nuclear weapons in his address at the high-level meeting to commemorate and promote the International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons.
I take this opportunity to reiterate the national principled position of the Bolivarian government on the need to completely eliminate nuclear weapons as a basis of our diplomacy of peace and our firm commitment to promote and build a safer, more peaceful world. Achieving this objective depends on the unanimous political will of all states, but particularly of nuclear weapons holding states. Venezuela has always condemned the production, stockpiling, use, and threat of use of weapons of mass destruction, including, of course, nuclear weapons. The only guarantee against the threat or the use of nuclear weapons is their complete elimination. We express our deep concern at the prospect of a new nuclear arms race, including the use of outer space for their deployment. This is evidence of the derogation of mutually agreed upon international treaties to limit and reduce nuclear weapons between the main nuclear weapons states. The collapse of these agreements, the increase of nuclear spending, show the unacceptable regression that is taking place in this area. These deployments prove that we are far from the peace and security.
And the Venezuelan Foreign Minister also criticised the actions of the United States on the matter and its continuous interference in internal affairs of other nations.
Unfortunately, the interests of a very small group of states have prevailed over the interests of humanity. We know that the United States of America use every means within their grasp to intervene in the domestic affairs of peoples and continually affect the internal peace and international peace. Multilateralism and the diplomacy of peace must prevent the warmongering supremacist ambitions of Washington from risking life on our planet. No more nuclear weapons, no more weapons of mass destruction. Let us act firmly for humanity.
Also speaking before the UN this Friday, Mexican Foreign Secretary Marcelo Ebrard stressed that nuclear development hinders research in other fields which are more important for humanity's future.
Development focuses a large amount of resources which are needed to respond to the health priorities. The more proliferation of nuclear weapons, the fewer resources there are available in the world to respond to the inequality we have in access to health care and also to research on new viruses, to mutations, to microorganisms that we have to be vigilant about. And the world invests more in weapons in general than in scientific research, which we should have to protect humanity from these changes, mutations, and new viruses that we will have to face. If we want to build a world where we can guarantee peace, we must necessarily prohibit nuclear weapons.
And also on the occasion of the high-level UN meeting, the Cuban Minister of Foreign Affairs, Bruno Rodriguez, rejected the US decision to withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal and condemned the US attempts to restore the Monroe Doctrine.
We reject the decision of the U.S. government to withdraw from the Iran nuclear treaty and the short and medium-range missiles treaty signed with the former Soviet Union. These are unilateral actions with grave consequences for international stability and security. We urge the United States to ratify the Treaty on the Reduction and Limitation of Strategic Offensive Arms, or START, with Russia. We condemn the U.S. attempts to restore the Monroe Doctrine in contravention of international law and the proclamation of Latin America and the Caribbean as a zone of peace. As was expressed by Fidel Castro Ruz, the commander-in-chief of the Cuban Revolution, and I quote, "Bombs may kill the hungry, the sick, and the ignorant, but bombs cannot kill hunger, disease, and ignorance." End of quote. We deserve a world of peace, free from nuclear weapons. Let us fight for this world.
And the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres stated in his opening remarks to the high-level plenary meeting that the world continues to live in the shadows of a nuclear catastrophe.
Nuclear disarmament has been a priority of the United Nations since the very beginning of the organization's existence. Yet, 75 years since the founding of the United Nations and since the horrific bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the world continues to live in the shadow of nuclear catastrophe. Some states view nuclear weapons as vital to their national security and survival. But the elimination of nuclear weapons is vital to something beyond the fate of any single state, the survival of life on this planet. It is imperative that the Russian Federation and the United States of America extend without delay the New START treaty for the duration of 5 years. For the sake of all of our security, the world must return to a common path towards nuclear disarmament. Ultimately, however, the only way to completely eliminate nuclear risk is to completely eliminate nuclear weapons. The Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons remains the cornerstone of the nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation regime.
Also during the high-level meeting to commemorate and promote the International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons, the President of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, stressed that as long as nuclear weapons exist, humankind's survival will always be threatened.
President, for as long as nuclear weapons exist, humankind will continue to face the threat of catastrophe. A selective focus on non-proliferation measures and the lack of progress on nuclear disarmament undermine this bargain. As the only country that has voluntarily abandoned nuclear weapons, South Africa remains deeply concerned that the nuclear disarmament obligations under Article 6 of the Non-Proliferation Treaty remain unfulfilled. The only guarantee we have that nuclear weapons will never be used is their total elimination and the legally binding assurance that they will never again be produced.
US President Donald Trump has been taken to the Walter Reed Military Hospital after testing positive for COVID-19. The president tweeted early on Friday that he and First Lady Melania Trump had tested positive for the coronavirus just hours after the White House announced that senior aide Hope Hicks came down with the virus after traveling with the president several times this week. Trump is 74 years old, putting him at higher risk of serious complications from a virus that has now killed more than 200,000 people in the United States. The White House said Trump would spend a few days at the hospital, where he will continue to work from the presidential suite, and that the move was simply precautionary. On Friday, the spokesman of the Armenian Ministry of Defense said that numerous injuries and destruction were caused by the bombing of the capital of the disputed region of Nagorno-Karabakh. The Armenian Ministry of Foreign Affairs declared its readiness to cooperate with the Minsk Group to achieve a ceasefire in the region based on the 1994 to 1995 agreements. The ministry also reaffirmed condemnation of the threats or use of force by Azerbaijan and the direct involvement of Turkey in the hostilities against Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh. On Thursday, the leaders of Russia, the United States and France, co-chair countries of the Minsk Group, called on Baku and Yerevan to immediately end hostilities in the region and resume negotiations without preconditions. The Turkish Foreign Ministry has criticised EU leaders for their continued references to possible sanctions against Ankara as the conflict in the Eastern Mediterranean simmers on. According to Turkish diplomats, the outcome of the EU summit, which ended in Brussels on Friday, showed that European Union-Turkey relations had been taken hostage by Greece and Cyprus. It's not constructive to continue to use the language of sanctions, the Turkish Foreign Ministry said in a statement. Ankara is at loggerheads with both Greece and Cyprus over offshore energy rights and maritime borders in the Mediterranean region. At the summit, EU leaders assured Cyprus that they will review Turkey's behaviour in December, warning that sanctions will be imposed against Ankara if its provocations have not stopped after the island nation withdrew its opposition to sanctions on Belarus. And Turkey's government is being accused of hiding the true extent of the country's coronavirus outbreak after the health minister revealed that the daily COVID-19 figures published by his ministry reflect only patients with symptoms and not all positive cases. The minister acknowledged during a press conference late on Wednesday that since July 29th, Turkey has been reporting the number of patients being cared for in hospitals or at their homes. The count does not include asymptomatic positive cases, he said, thus ignoring an aspect of the number of new positive coronavirus cases per day, a key indicator of where the outbreak is headed in any country. The revelation led to an outcry on social media, with people calling on the government to reveal the true spread of the coronavirus among the population of 83 million. The International Air Transport Association has warned that the extended impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the aviation sector in the Middle East will result in 1.7 million job losses this year. The figure accounts for nearly half of the region's 3.3 million aviation-related jobs. According to the statistics, 323,000 jobs will be lost in aviation alone in 2020, representing about 46% in the region. Normally, aviation contributes $213 billion to the region's GDP. Closing borders due to the COVID-19 pandemic has reduced this to $108 billion. The association has recommended air transport recovery through the application of COVID-19 tests as an alternative to restrictive quarantine measures in order to revive the industry. 11 countries in the Middle East have reopened their borders to regional and international air travel. However, in 9 of these countries, passengers are still subject to a mandatory quarantine. And we've come to the end of this news brief, but remember you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Telegram for TeleSUR English. I'm Katrina Goss and thank you for watching.